my topic this week couldn't be more different.
Yes.
From your topic. So I've been kind of thinking, like during the pandemic, during lockdown, during COVID, with everything that's been going on, people need to have like a bit of happiness in their life. You know, they need to have hobbies. They need to have like things that they're doing to keep them busy.
And you just go mad, sit in the house all day, you know?
Yeah. And there's been one aspect that's been kind of consistent in yours and my life over the past, I want to say 7 years.
Yeah.
Something along those lines. And that is Dungeons and Dragons.
Yes. The best game on earth, guys.
Yeah. The best game on earth. Yeah, I would agree with that. So to give you guys a little bit of background on what Dungeons and Dragons is, if you haven't heard of it or if you don't know what it is, D&D is a tabletop role-playing game where a bunch of people come together, normally 4 or 5. They create a character or a kind of warrior, like a fighter, and they'll play in a game where they'll roll some dice. They'll kind of role-play that character, make decisions as that character, and it's kind of played through this other player called the Dungeon Master. So there's someone at the table who controls the game and is the kind of conduit for the players.
I look at the Dungeon Master as like the storyteller in a huge way. He's like every single character as well as the overarching story. It's a very important role. But
yeah, so to give you guys an example and put it into context, you know, J.K. Rowling went away and wrote Harry Potter, and that was like a sort of self-contained story where she wrote all the characters. Now, there's a bit at the start of the first Harry Potter movie where he gets to Hogwarts and his arch nemesis, Draco Malfoy, extends his arm in like a sort of like friendship, like a sort of try to give him a bit of advice, a bit of like racist advice, as it turns out.
Yeah.
And Harry chooses to not shake his hand. Now, the Dungeon Master kind of sets up that scenario. He would tell you what was going on, and the player, who would be Harry in this scenario, would be able to choose whether or not he shook his hand or not.
Yes.
And the Dungeon Master wouldn't have to react. So they're almost like a world builder, and the people at the table play in the world as characters. They make choices, and the Dungeon Master has to react to those choices and tell them what happens.
It's quite a complicated concept to describe to people that haven't played it before. I have a way that I can kind of agree with this is I look at it as a bunch of like people that are effectively like, acting in character and just like imagining a world around them that's painted by a DM and interacting in ways that their character would want to do that. So for instance, like, let's go to the pub tonight, you know, and then we'll sing around, and the DM will introduce who's at the pub, who's behind the bar. There'll be some quests going on, and all of a sudden a story just builds itself. So it's very much like an imagination heavy, role play heavy, character based exercise.
Yeah, and all the while you're doing this, the Dungeon Master is giving you sort of quests. The characters that they will introduce will be giving you missions. On these missions, you'll be going and you'll be solving puzzles, and you'll be fighting monsters who have all these abilities to try and stop you. You have to use your abilities. So there's, it's quite complicated as well. There's a lot of depth there if you want to go into it. You can play a simplified version if you just buy the simple, basic adventuring starters kit. But there's like 4 or 5 different like books now that you can go that all have their own rules, and you can kind of make it as complicated as you want, really. So D&D is sort of a game that has a lot of like stigma around it, I would say. So, and not only D&D, but like video games and tabletop games, I think they nerds, exactly. They have a lot of like stigma about them, about being sort of like nerd culture. And even back when D&D started, because it's been around for,
a long time,
it's like 40, 50 years now, I think. There was a lot of stuff going about back then that it was related to the occult and stuff like that. It was like devil worshipping stuff. So just why do you think that these things have so much stigma now? Because who isn't a gamer these days? Everybody that you see has a phone, and they all have games on their phone. So somebody plays games in some way, shape, or form. Chess. You have Snakes and Ladders with your kids.
Sure.
You have
frustration.
You have video games on your PlayStation and your Xbox. Everyone's a gamer in some way, shape, or form, right?
These days especially, everyone games. As you said, whether it's just like Candy Crush on your phone. But I think there's always been kind of a distinction between games like D&D and like gaming, like frustration with the family on a Saturday night. Like, it's almost hard to describe. It's because, like, first thing, D&D involves a lot of preparation, man. For everyone, like the DM, it's a hard job to do. You know, like you need to for every single session, which will typically take 3-4 hours. You know, like for an average game. So, imagine from like a DM's perspective, you need to imagine what content are my players, the people that are in character playing the game, what are they going to want to approach within a 4-hour scope. You know, that's a huge amount of work, and I've never DM'd myself, but it sounds very difficult. But not only that, like, you can't expect players just to walk up to the game and start playing. They need to spend like a couple hours at home reading over the rules. They need to spend a couple hours making up a character and come in, invested in this character. They need to go out and buy a bunch of dice and stuff like that, you know. So it's like, it's not an easy startup, I think, for one thing. And it's the whole concept of D&D is kind of almost like, we play it for the role play, but yeah, there's a lot of dice. There's like lots of random chance. There, if you want it to be, there can be a lot of numbers, you know. So there's another, just a possible barrier to stop people. Like, see, when you start describing combat to people that haven't played D&D before, it's like, see, once you start playing it, it's very simple, but to describe it for someone the first time, it's not simple. You know?
There's probably quite a big gate for entry into D&D. And maybe the rules and the dice and the numbers and stuff like that can be considered like the nerd culture.
Yeah, I think so.
But that's like waning now, right? Like, nerd culture isn't seen as the negative thing that it was seen before. Like, you see that there still occasionally is something that pops up online about how esports aren't sports or anything like that. But those opinions are like slowly sort of like drifting away, I think, at this point.
Yeah, I think. But that's what's interesting, isn't it? Because like nerd culture still exists, it's still there. I think they still get gaming shops, but it's just that the stigmatism is kind of waning, and I don't know. I wonder why that is. It's because I guess it's just like we live in a generally more diverse world, so people are naturally more accepting of things because there's so many things going on. Maybe I don't know if you have an opinion on that, but I think. Definitely this nerd culture is like a real thing, and there's like, it's not just D&D, you know. There's like basically any game which involves a bunch of people playing in character or like playing with dice on a tabletop. It's pretty goddamn nerdy to me, you know.
Yeah, I think you're right. It probably is. But the idea to me that like gaming and like doing that with dice is like nerdy is it's a bit absurd, because you see people that play video games. Or like on their phone or whatever, you see them playing dice games with their kids or whatever. You know, they do all of these things in different aspects of their life, and D&D just kind of like brings it all together. Yeah. So what do you think makes D&D different from all these other games? Like, because we think D&D is very special.
Sure. Yeah, definitely.
But what is different about it than your, you know, you can play role playing games on your PlayStation. You can play dice rolling games on a board. What makes D&D different from these things?
Yeah, this is one of the, like, just like as an aside, like, you and I, we talk about D&D a lot. We went through when we were playing D&D a lot. It's basically all we used to talk about whenever we used to hang out and stuff like that. So when it comes to my idea of what makes D&D so like beautiful and special, it has to be just like the potentially limitless freedom you have in playing this game and what you're going to be encountering when you sit down at that table. Like, it's like I play video games, you know. I'm not a gamer, a hardcore gamer or anything like that, but like, I've played like a lot of RPGs or role-playing games where like you do have a character and you're invested in them and you're going up levels and you're going on quests. And imagine like Lord of the Rings, you know, like you're going out and slaying dwarfs and all that type of nonsense. Nothing like that comes close to D&D, you know. It's because like when you're playing these games, you're still confined by rules that can become transcended when it's D&D. For instance, like, I don't know if this analogy will be brilliant or like really like understood by a lot of people, but like in games where like you're using combat, you're playing in combat, like you'll have a certain button that does attacks with your axe, you'll have another button which kicks them, you have another button which like throws, shuriken,
like jump, stuff like that.
Sure, exactly, yeah. So like you might have a fair amount of freedom when it comes to the actions you can do in this game, because like you could choose to incorporate these in different combinations or like try and use some special a way of manipulating this in order to beat the combat. When it comes to D&D, you're not putting inputs into it as much as at the end of you'll still roll your dice and you'll swing a sword in order to do damage, but like it's I can't understate this when I say like it's you can do anything. You
Yeah.
could like your character could decide they want to vault up that wall, and when they're doing it, grab something over there. And obviously, there's like rules in this game, so you can't do ridiculous things. You can only do a certain number of things per turn, but
the freedom is what you're getting
exactly.
at.
It's for me. Like it's just like the ways that you can interact with the world are truly limitless, and if you have a good DM, you can do anything. You know.
Yeah, when you're playing,
Try anything.
the closest thing we can relate to D&D is probably these role-playing games that we play like on the PlayStation. You know, and it's like you get given a certain amount of choice with the things you can do there. It's like you can go here or you can go here, and when you get to that place, you can talk to him or you can talk to her.
Yeah.
It's like there are confines, there are boxes, there are walls that you can see, you know, that ruin your immersion in these things.
Right. You're looking at a screen.
Yeah.
You know,
When you play D&D, the choices that you make and the freedom that you have and the things that you do are purely limited by your imagination, you know, and by the conduit that is your dungeon master. You know, if you have a good dungeon master, whatever you ask for, they will give back to you in some way, shape or form. You know, you might fail at what you want to do, but you can try. You know, you can certainly do any of these things that you want to try and do, and the dungeon master will interpret that for you and will kind of like spit it back to you.
I think another thing that's really enticing about D&D is it's so like when I'm talking about freedom, for people that haven't played D&D, it might sound like that could be construed as a bad thing, but like D&D is quite, as much as there's so much freedom to do, it's also quite confined by its rules. You know, there are a lot of rules for most scenarios, like, and you can only interact with the game in like almost like a paradoxically limited way, because you can do anything, but in order to do these things, you need to do the same dice rolls, you need to do the same checks, and these will be affected by your character's abilities. And like you can't, like for instance, like imagine your character is talking to some drug dealer or something like that. This usually happens in D&D. There's usually drug dealers involved in our games anyway, and you'll be interacting with them, and they'll like say, I want to try and steal his coin purse, you know. And it's like, sure, you can do that, you can give that a shot, because you know that sounds fun, and lock picking and like thievery is a thing in this game. But the DM's probably sitting thinking to themselves, like, this character, this person that's dealing with them as contraband, they're not an idiot. They're not just going to let this blindly happen. And see, if you do that, there's going to be real consequences. So let me think about the consequences right here. So the player, they have this freedom, and they're confined by the rules in order to carry out that operation, but then they're further confined by the world that the DM has built and the realistic consequence of their actions. So it's like freedom in like a realistic sense, you know?
Yeah.
So it's not just as free flowing as I can do whatever I want. And that makes the game brilliant. It's I can do whatever I want, and the results of me trying that will make sense, you know.
And especially for like board games and stuff like that, when you're playing like Snakes and Ladders, for example, there are very real confines to that game. You know, it has an objective at the end. You're all trying to do the same thing, but the confines for that game are very sort of like stringent.
Sure.
Whereas when you play D&D, it's like, yes, we have a goal, we've been given a quest, and it's like, how do you want to achieve that? And it's kind of like the game doesn't like tell you how to do that.
No, yeah.
You need to like figure it out. So it's kind of like almost like puzzle solving in a way.
It is, yeah. Well, it's like that's it's great. It's because like when I'm talking about it being realistic, like what a good DM does, like they'll put the party, the players that are playing the game, in a scenario, and they'll like give them like a lead. So it says, oh, you've heard there's quests going on at the tavern. You're currently all sitting in the middle of a marketplace. It's like, what do you want to do now? You know, that's like. There's no. It's like, well, what's the quest? What do we need to do? It's like, well, you need to find someone that will give you the quest. You know, you can't. I'm not going to tell you. I'm not a person. There's no God in the sky telling you what you need to do, or there's no objective marker. You need to find ways of getting this information, and the DM has this all planned, or at least they have routes and avenues in which this information can get fed to the party, and it's just like freeform navigation through this world in order to get to their objectives. So it almost makes it feel so much more organic and paid off as well. You know, and that's directly, as you said, through this problem solving aspect, is because it's not just handed.
Yeah, so the game has like less confines. It has like much more degrees of freedom than any other game you've ever played, and the thing that I think is so fascinating about D&D is that, you know, you can play it the imagination that you have is almost like that's almost the limit to like what you can do, and then
what you can try to do,
and the DM will then interpret that for you.
Right, exactly. That's exactly the point.
Is that what you like about D&D?
I love that about D&D.
I think it's one of the factors of why I like it.
Yeah, it's one of the factors. Another thing, which I think is probably more like just for our group and the groups that like, I've played with you in, is like the role play aspects. Like, I love that. It's because like there's, it's so I said at the beginning, like you come up with a character and you come up with a backstory for them, and like when we like walk into a game of D&D, it's as if we're like Dawn the Kill, you know. It's like I am the character now, you know. It's like improv acting or something sometimes.
Yeah, our group has, and I think I'm glad that it has very much got to the point where we kind of sit down at the table, and I'm no longer Scott, and you're no longer Lewis. Like you are your character in D&D, and I'm the dungeon master kind of thing, and we play in that scenario. And you know, you're talking as your character to your friend who is also their character.
Yeah.
But these characters are all like amazing people that have fantastic abilities, and they are people in their own right. And I don't know what it is about stepping into someone else's shoes that is like so fun.
Yeah.
You know, you can do and say things that you wouldn't do. You can be someone else. You can be someone better. You know, someone that has all these crazy spells and abilities.
Right. That's a good point, isn't it? There's something to this, like there's some of the idea of playing D&D of like embodying a better ideal, or not even just a better ideal, just a different ideal, because you'll come up with like a core of a character, and you just it's something quite freeing or liberating, isn't it, about being able to say what your character says. Like, well, I didn't say it, you know, my character did, type of thing, you know.
Yeah, there's almost like no consequences for you in real life.
Right,
you know,
yeah,
you can do these things.
Sure, exactly, yeah. But it's like it's we're talking about like the cheeky stuff, like oh I can get away with, but it's like there's like something to be said for you like playing with a friend of yours, but like you're both role playing characters that don't know each other, so you're going through this process of like them getting to know each other and like conversing.
How much do you trust that person?
Yeah, exactly. And they're thinking to yourself, like, what are they thinking about what do they think about my character, and what are the repercussions of this? And it's just this crazy dynamic I think that's probably a huge part of like where the off-putting nerdiness comes from, though.
Maybe. And one of the biggest aspects of roleplay that we see in D&D pop culture right now, you know, there are D&D games that are like out there. You can go and watch them online, and one of the biggest ones right now is Critical Role, which is a D&D game between 8 voice actors. So they're like professionally paid actors who have come together, and they have like an excellent dungeon master, and they come together and they do this extremely roleplay heavy game where it is. The vast majority of it isn't really about killing monsters or going on adventures. It's actually about the interactions that these people have. It's like watching a TV show.
Yeah, a soap or something, you know.
So there are like so many ways to play D&D as well, because
that's a good point.
We've played in these roleplay heavy games, but we've also played in games at like a gaming shop, for example, where the guys were just there to like fight monsters and roll dice.
Yeah, and go up levels, you know, and get new spells and new weapons. And like, you're exactly right. I guess that's part to do with like the freedom, the limitless of this game is that you can walk up to the table and want something out of this, and you'll get it, you know. And this is, and that's where the importance of the DM comes in, is recognizing what the players want out of this game. Yeah, it's because, like you said, like we play in this group.
He's definitely, or he or she is definitely the most important person at the table.
Oh. By like spades and droves, you know, like by a huge amount. If you have a DM that's able to like cater the game you're playing to the people that are sitting at that table, it will be a brilliant game. You know, it's just no. If you're able to pick up on these things, it's going to be brilliant. And we've sat in that. We've also played in a setting where, you know, we've not had the DM that's done that. Like, for instance, like a game shop where it's almost more casually type of thing. It's not a bunch of friends. It's people that are playing up to play Dungeons and Dragons. And it's still fucking brilliant. It's
still fun as hell.
Brilliant.
I'd still do that.
Yeah.
Like
over not playing.
Over not playing, exactly.
Sure.
So when we talk about D&D as a game, I get an awful lot of questions from family and friends that's like, well, what is D&D?
How do you win D&D?
How do you win? That's the big one you get. It's like, what do you do to win this game?
Yeah.
And it's like, well, the confines of the game that you're playing is also at the limitations of the imagination of the dungeon master.
Yeah.
Anything the dungeon master like can think of can be like in the game.
Mm-hmm.
So your game, if your players want to play this kind of like, we want to like be warriors who fight monsters and save towns, it's like, okay, you can do that. If you want to be this group that goes on these sort of subterfuge quests and has to like talk their way out of like,
That's what we're going to be doing today.
talk through guards and stuff like that, if you want to be on like this hero quest, you can do any of those things, you know.
Yeah.
The very first game that I dungeon mastered was a game where a bunch of like dragons had taken over the continent the players were living at, and the story was basically for them to kill these dragons,
right,
and then eventually take out their leader and save the continent.
Mm-hmm.
And by the way, in that game, the players didn't manage to do that.
Yeah, exactly. There was no happy ending.
They got all the way to the final boss, and the boss killed them.
Yeah,
because
yeah.
they weren't prepared for it, and that was how the game ended. And it was like
brilliant.
Nobody won in that scenario,
yeah,
you know.
Yeah.
And maybe the players, you know, they obviously they had sad feelings about it because we played that game for about 8-10 months,
and that's a lot of investment for a sad ending where your character dies, you know. Like,
yeah, but you can do this if you want. Like that is a game that you can play, and you can, you know, depending on the game that your players want to play, the dungeon master can set that up.
Yeah,
it's not one thing.
No, exactly. I think you and I, we definitely like. I guess how you describe it, like, we like aspects of realism in our game. I think like we like we like consequences. You know,
yes.
I like that a lot in games. You know, and like exactly like you said, it's like you might have been playing this game for 8 months. You know, you might have been like loving your character and get towards this point, but see if you weren't thinking about how you're going to take out this dragon. The dragon's going to kill you. You know, like if you don't prepare, I'm not going to make it easy for you because you didn't prepare. Like these are your actions. These are your consequences.
And that was almost like really showcased in the game that we just had.
Right.
So we've just finished playing a game that lasted 2
years.
years.
Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah, where I was a dungeon master and we had maybe about 100, must have been 100 odd sessions.
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
I was spanning like 4 hours each, and it was a world that I wrote, a story that I came up with, and people that I'd filled it with, and there was 7 players at the table. Who'd each made their own characters. Yeah, and that is quite a complicated, large game.
Oh yeah. Big backdrop as well.
Yeah, and the element of our game that we like is very much the role play. You know, we do combat.
Yeah.
We do combat.
Do some stealth. You know, like you sprinkle stuff in. You know.
Yeah, exactly. But the element of the game that we like is very much the role play. It's 7 people coming to the table who don't know each other, who aren't the people at the table,
right,
who are now having these like really fun interactions, and their past and their backstory is sort of creeping into the game, and that's kind of influencing their friendships and doing stuff like that.
Yeah.
It's kind of crazy.
It's absolutely mind-boggling, to be honest with you. It's because there's also like it's a huge amount of complexity when it comes to it as well. I think in certain scenarios, because like what we like to do is we like to play characters, and we like to think about, if this has happened, what would my character feel and what would they think, and what will I do to reflect that type of thing. But there's also like an awareness that you are playing a game with a bunch of people at a table and you aren't your character, you know. And sometimes it's like, so sometimes there's like a dissonance where you need to just be aware, like, because this is actually like a kind of a pet peeve, you know, like Dungeons and Dragons groups, that there's like, you know how in gaming scenarios there's always like that guy who just fucks it up for everyone. There's like a D&D that guy, you know.
Yeah.
And one of those is not being aware that you're playing a group game. It's because it's deceptive, isn't it? Like D&D, you're made to feel like you're the main character, but you're not really.
Not by any stretch of the imagination. And while you want to do and say things in your character and what your character would do, you also want everyone at the table to be enjoying themselves.
You want to have fun. Exactly.
At the end of the day, this is about having fun.
Exactly.
And make no mistake, D&D is probably the most fun I've ever had. If you can get a good group and a good dungeon master, D&D is the most fun I've ever experienced.
I
you know,
agree with you.
there's something unbelievably freeing about it. And the thing about it is, I don't think you can really grasp what we're saying until you've experienced it.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what has to happen, you know. I think that in life there are, I would say, when it comes to the things that you experience in life, there are certain things that you must do at one point in your life. And D&D is definitely on my list. It is something I think that everybody should play and try at least once, because I haven't met anybody who's played this game once and thought, no, no thanks.
You're right. Yeah, I've never seen that before. Actually, someone that has started it. There've been a couple of people like played at shops that have played over like a period of a little time. And they've like dipped a toe and stuff like that. But I think everyone loves it, and also it's like just the whole concept of like playing in character. So like the people that you. So we've only played with like one group of people that we didn't know that weren't actually friends before us. But like by the end of it, kind of were friends, you know, like in their own way. There's a bonding going on. It's because as much as I didn't know them very well, my character knew them quite well by the end. So there's this weird kind of dynamic going on.
It's a different kind of like interaction between your friends. You know, you can play a game with your friends, but like we say, those games have like rules and confinements. Like you can play Monopoly, or you can play, you know, a game on the PlayStation or the computer or whatever. But D&D has this sort of ultimately unique interaction between people.
Yeah,
That's at its like very core. It's like you're sitting playing a game with your friend, where the only limitation that you have is what you can think of, and the only limitation to your interactions are what the dungeon master can think of. You know, it's not a controlled environment in any way, shape, or form. Because when I played our game and I was a dungeon master, you can only plan like 4 hours ahead, and then what happens in that session then determines how I need to plan going forward. Because you present scenarios to the players. They make choices, and then I have to think about what those choices mean. You know,
right? Okay.
How does the world react to those choices? And it's a unique experience that is fresh every single week. Every single week you come to the table, it is different than it was the week before.
Yeah,
it's new, and it's your choice where it goes from there. It's uniquely bizarre in its own way.
Yeah, I think that's a thought occurred to me when you were saying that. Like it's also good. It's like uniquely suited to maximize your enjoyment as well, because like you're playing this game
if
and,
you
like,
play it correctly.
That's the thing. Like there's like a line to walk here, and like if you can find it, if you can figure it out, and like if the DM can figure out how they want the group interaction to play out, if they can figure out how to implement that, I'm just telling you, it's going to be the best game you've ever played. It's because, like, by definition, because you've optimized your enjoyment. You know, like as I said, we like consequences. We think that's really fun. See if you don't like that game, or like see if you want to just kick ass every single week and like get a bunch of new stuff and spend money and be ridiculous. You're gonna have the most fun on earth playing D&D with the right DM. It's because that's what you'll be doing every single session, and you'll be fucking loving it. You know?
Yeah. If you have like a group of people that you enjoy hanging out with, and that you find that you have similar interests, like if you have a group of people that you go to the pub with, for example, or if you go to play a sport, you know, I play hockey, for example. If you go and play hockey, then there'll be a group there who has like similar interests.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, and if you can figure out what type of game it is that you'll enjoy, and you can have a dungeon master that will facilitate that game, then you're going to have an absolute blast.
Yeah.
And there's no two ways about it.
Yeah, I know. It's an absolutely incredible thing about it, isn't it? It's which makes it so hard to describe to people, is the sheer scope of this game. Like, and it's also the drawback of it as well. I think it's because it's. I think I agree with you that everyone should play this game, you know, but it's hard to get into it, you know, and it's almost necessitated by. I think your group was probably not super common in the fact that neither of you were a DM before, but like one of you stood up to do it, and like you all just jumped in, and this is completely new. Like the way that me and my friends, we were introduced by one of our other friends that played in a group, and they played in another group, and like they had this chain of people DMing from different groups, and I got the impression that like a lot of how the D&D Dungeons and Dragons circles spread is through exposing other people to D&D.
Yeah.
Then they'll make their own group.
Oh, it's very much a word of mouth.
Oh, it is. Yeah, not even word of mouth.
Game.
It's like you need to kind of experience it to have an idea of how you'd want to iterate it in your group. I feel like I know you guys. It was kind of. I think I don't know. Was it much of a bumpy road for you to start while you were still figuring it out?
So at the very beginning, we had watched some things about it, and you had started playing in your group, and you told me about it.
How much fun I was having.
Yeah, and I said to my friends at university, you know, we need to try this. So one of the guys just, you know, took the plunge, and he DM'd a game. Now you can find pre-written games out there.
Exactly. Yeah.
You know, it's clear. The game that I just finished running, I wrote the entire story, and I wrote everyone that was in it. But there are pre-written adventure guides that Wizards of the Coast, which are the company that sort of own the D&D brand.
Yes.
There are pre-written adventures that they have there. So in theory, what your dungeon master would need to do is just read through that, understand
How the game
how
is
the
played.
how the game is played, and then write up your characters. You write up your characters and come back, and you can play this game. But at the beginning, we hadn't really figured out what game it was we like to play.
Right, exactly.
So we came to the table with these characters, and the dungeon master kind of played the game with us, and we still had a lot of fun.
Yeah.
It was great, actually. It was still absolutely fantastic.
It's just because you didn't know what it could be, though, you know.
Yeah, exactly. But the game evolved every single week. At the very beginning, we weren't even role playing. We were we were literally just getting a quest, killing a monster, and we enjoyed that because we were gamers at heart anyway.
Yeah. That's what most of my first game was. Like that was before role playing was really, really introduced.
But by the time it came around to our second game, and I became the dungeon master in that second game, and that was the one where the players all died at the end. We'd started to do a whole new thing where it was like we really dived deep into the characters. We came to the table and we had voices. We were totally separating ourselves from our characters. We were like, once we reached the table, we were like somebody else now. And it was the game evolved to this whole new level. And then even when we finished that game and we moved on to the next one, we stepped it up a notch, like even more.
Yeah, definitely.
And it evolved from there. So like the more you play it as well, the more you realise what you enjoy, and the more you can change the game to make it like that.
Yeah, I think probably worth mentioning as well is that like what we're talking about is like a perfect example of D&D that goes right. It's because like we have a huge interest in D&D. We often read about D&D online and stuff like that, and it seems that like there's often problems in games that all come down to like communication between like DMs and players. Like there's a lot of people that get resentful. There's a lot of people that want, like, I think the main key does it. They want to be playing a game in a certain way, and the DM will have a different idea of how the game should be played, and this ends up causing lots of like frustration when it comes to D&D. And like I really need to stress that like every problem you encounter in this game can be hashed out. Compromises can be made, and once you've found them, everyone's going to have fun. It's one of those ones that's it is very much an iterative process. Like your campaign, like the one that I took part in, that we were playing for like 2 years. The first like 5 sessions of that, there was clear growth, just figuring out and like looking at the table, looking at what people like, figuring out what they enjoy, and then it kind of you seem to just sculpt it towards this makeup of like almost like a how like a session. Yeah, it looked like you had an idea of what you wanted to happen each session, almost like a kind of a list to tick off to make sure certain things were made happy to the group. And once we'd kind of got that, and once we'd realised what parents weren't happy about, what you weren't happy about our game, we're able to be much happier about how it's played. Because like I know that when we started playing, I think you were frustrated about how unimaginative or how bad at problem solving our group was.
I think that the problem at first was that we were coming. The game before that, we had come to the realisation that we like to have a lot of choice in our games. We like to be really free in what we could do, and we like to decide where the story was going to go. So at the beginning of our game, I literally opened up the book and I was like, you guys can do whatever you want. Like, choose something. And the party, like, it just, the people that were in the game just like weren't picking a direction, so they ended up like sort of like mucking about for like 4 or 5 weeks. And then I kind of realised that they do like the idea of choice, but they also like like to be kicked in the direction that they're going to go in. So
you realise what governmental policy was.
So I started giving them sort of more quest lines. I started giving them things that they should be doing. And the party kind of, I think the party thought that they were choosing what they were doing. Like people at the table thought that they were controlling the story, when in actual fact they weren't. But that was the dynamic.
That was what we wanted.
That was the dynamic that we came to. That was, as the dungeon master, I realised they liked having a choice, but they also
not too much choice.
They liked having the choice of what they were doing, but the choice could be obvious. And they would still be happy with it.
Exactly. Yeah, like it's. That was one thing I think we discovered in our group, wasn't it? It's like they need some direction, and not only is having no choices bad, too many choices can be just as bad. It's because there's just like faffing around and doing absolutely nothing, and a huge learning process. And like I don't know how long do you think it took you until you were at this place where you were definitely comfortable with how the sessions were going to be unreeling and the game you wanted to give us. And when did that really solidify for you?
Probably 5 weeks.
5 weeks, really?
5 weeks,
Wow,
I would say. But the first campaign that I played, I DM'd that, and it was a pre-written adventure. Which,
Yes.
by the way, if you're going to play D&D, I
with
would
it
I would
pre-written.
recommend that you play a pre-written adventure first of all, because it's too much to play a homebrew, which
Yeah.
means to make it up on the, for you to make it up and bring it to the table. It's too difficult to do that. First of all, I would advise you doing a pre-written adventure and finding your feet while you do that, and then once you finish that, if you're feeling confident enough, you don't have to, because there are many pre-written adventures. If you're feeling sort of confident enough, do your own. That was what I did, because I knew what my players wanted at that stage.
Right, exactly.
The game kind of took up another step. But yeah, I think maybe 5 weeks of being like a homebrew campaign before I realised what I had to do, so that people would start optimizing experience sort of thing. And to be clear, we still enjoyed the first 5 sessions.
Oh yeah,
They were fantastic.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean that's.
But the game just grew. The game grew and grew and grew.
That is the thing. Yeah, it's like we learned eventually what we could be doing. And that's what I'm talking about. Like I'm talking about these stumbling blocks at the beginning when we started playing. Like I've never had a session of D&D I've not enjoyed. Ever. I've probably had sessions where I walked out of it and be like, wasn't informed tonight, or like something happened there, but like I've never ever not enjoyed myself.
No.
It's incredible like that. And yeah, it's the worst part about lockdown right now is that getting hold of a D&D game
we can't play in person.
That's not an option anymore. And because it's like you said, it's like 8 people in a room for like 4 hours. It's quite an intense situation. It's not something you can just like pop by, or you need to really have a dedicated time every week, I think, to realistically and commit to this. A problem with a lot of D&D groups I see is like flakiness. Like people not making it 1 week or that type of thing. Or and we went through a period of that as well. You always have like players that are more flaky than others. But we got into that stage where like we knew what was going to happen every week, and it's become part of our schedule. And thank God you got DMing as part of your schedule as well. It's because it was definitely a lot easier for the players. But oh yeah, an incredible game. And I really can't wait until I play my next game, just because of all the points we've just previously rehearsed.
Yeah. So to start off this topic, I said there's a lot of there's badness going on at the moment. There's bad things going on in the world, like the pandemic, lockdown and stuff like that. So this is probably the time where people are free to do stuff like that.
Yes.
And when the pandemic started, we were finishing off my game, and we used this website called Roll20, which is like this online tool for you to play D&D on. So I would honestly say, if you have the time right now, if you have the schedule, because the pandemic is stopping you from doing things, and you have a bunch of friends that haven't seen each other for a while.
Yeah, looking for something to do. An excuse to see each other.
If you're looking for a reason to spend time with your friends, I would get together, maybe someone take the plunge. If you're listening to this and you're thinking, I would like to do that, get a 5th edition handbook, get a player's handbook, a rule book, get a dungeon master's guide, and start looking to play a D&D game, and get your friends together and do it, because now is the time to start it. And then if you begin to play online now, when lockdown ends, and you can then play in person,
that'll be a big step up for you, won't it?
Yeah. Because playing in person is brilliant. So being able to be there, seeing your friends' reactions,
the hilarity,
reacting yourself. It's also one of the funniest times. The sheer hilarity that ensues.
Yeah, the stuff that people come up with on the spot, and characters, and it's brilliant.
That friend that might be a little bit shy.
Yeah.
Every so often they come up with like a great one-liner that'll floor the rest of the people that are there.
You'll never forget it.
Yeah, and it's all about incorporating like this fun and the hilarity. But if you want to play a more serious game as well, it's about melding those things together.
Exactly.
And the more you play, the more you enjoy, because it's just phenomenal.
Yeah. And as a side note as well, like a lot of what we're talking about applies to quite a range of tabletop games, and I think that it would be a good idea as well that if you maybe don't feel committed to playing D&D for like several weeks on end, just go into a local game store and look for just some random tabletop story written thing. Like you played the game in Connor's shop, where like you had like one. It was like a couple hours.
Yeah, so there are other tabletop games other than D&D. D&D is probably it's one of the more demanding ones, and it's one of the more rules heavy ones. But there are definitely a lot of other tabletop role-playing games
that involve aspects of what's involved in
if you want to do things like the roleplay, you can do that on a simpler version of the game. The game that I played that wasn't D&D but was still a role-playing game was called Monster of the Week.
That's it, Monster of
the Week. And it was, it was a much simpler version. The rules were much more streamlined, and there was no the rules weren't very complex.
No, yeah, and I think as a result of the simplicity, it's never going to be as good as D&D, right?
No, D&D, because there's so many layers to it, and we do also chase the complex game. That is an element of the game that we also enjoy.
Yeah, you're right.
But in D&D, you can also like strip all of that away if you want. As the dungeon master, if you look in the book and you see a rule that you don't like, you can just say no.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. Yeah.
At the end of the day, you make the rules. The book's only there to help you. You can say pretty much whatever you want, and if the player's gonna have to react to that. So it can be as complex or as simple as you want it to be, really.
Yeah, and that's like that'll be a whole new reawakening for a DM out there that starts to. They have enough of an idea of how the game works, and it's like, okay, this is going to be my game now. And like, we've got the rule book, and I'm still going to follow the books, but I don't think that plays that way, and I want it, or I don't want that kind of interaction happening in my party. Then it just like opens up for like the possibilities which were before limitless are just taken to another order.
Yeah, so it really can't be. We can't state it enough how much we enjoy D&D. Like I said, I think it's something that everyone should try and experience. If you hear about a D&D group that's playing around you, if you hear somebody mentioning they're playing D&D and looking for players, or if you fancy giving it a go yourself, like, and being a dungeon master, it's its own rewarding experience. I've been a player and a dungeon master, and both of the experiences are rewarding in their own way. So yeah, if you're thinking about any of these things and you want to try it with your group, could not recommend more. And you will have so much fun, and like you said, this will be the time to do it, because it will bring so much fun and order and something to look forward to and some degree of routine to your life. Yeah. So if literally anyone has taken up D&D because of this video, and we cannot recommend it enough, if anyone has and you try it, please come back and comment on this video, because that'd be amazing. That would be amazing. If somebody has went out there and tried D&D because of this, please leave us a comment with your experience, because we would love to hear it.
Yeah, that'd be kind of like direct evidence of spreading good in the world. That's kind of the way I look at it, because introducing someone to a game like D&D can only add value to their life.
Yeah. And that's been episode 7.
Episode 7.
Episode 7 of Guide to the 21st Century. Go out and play D&D, for God's sake.
That wasn't clear.
Go out and play some fucking D&D, because it's the most fun you'll ever have.
Yes, exactly.
If you take one thing from this podcast, it's played D&D. Forget about the backlash. Forget about the black lives. Forget all that.
All that political
forget
stuff.
about all that
nonsense.
All that political rubbish we talk about.
If you want to have fun for once, you will play D&D right this second.
Yeah. So thanks for listening, guys. If you have enjoyed, please leave a like, subscribe, comment if you've played D&D. We would love to hear about that.
Yeah. We'll get right back to you in the comments.
Okay. Right. Thanks for listening, guys.